You're listening to North Shore Now.
Thank you once again, Mayor Tim Tankey of Glen Cove, for joining us today. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing you to the gentleman who may be your next U.S. Congressional leader, Joshua Sauberman. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Josh, tell me about your past. What were you doing before you got into politics? What changed your life that made you want to run for public office?
Well, immediately before running for office, I was working in film, putting out social impact documentaries, including Inequality for All back in 2013, Saving Capitalism more recently in 2017. These are documentaries that discuss economic inequality and give viewers a crash course on where we've been as a country and where we risk going if we don't make fundamental changes to the way we run our corporate boardrooms, the way we run our governments, the way we interact with other people. Saving Capitalism expounds upon that, impressing it upon people on both sides of the aisle, whether you're black or white, Hispanic or Asian, rich or poor, left or right. The topics of economic inequality really affect everyone. And if we don't confront these topics in a meaningful way, the entire economic system will pancake on top of each other and collapse. It's something that I care about a great deal, having listened to my great grandparents and grandparents about their experiences during the Depression. And it's something I'd like to not have repeated in our economy. Before that, I was a cancer patient dealing
Cancer patient?
Yeah.
Whoa. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with what ended up being metastatic prostate cancer.
Wow.
The doctors couldn't figure it out at first.
That's pretty big.
But I mean, when I look in my neighborhood, when I look throughout my community, I see that many people who were on or around my age were diagnosed with cancers, whether it was prostate cancer or brain cancer, leukemia, lymphoma. These were all prevalent. Ovarian cancer was another big one. These were cancers that were all prevalent in our community, but because of the fact that they were all different types of cancers, since cancer reacts differently from person to person, we can't get a classification from the CDC that our community is a cluster community. Why is it a cluster community?
I'm sorry, what community were you talking about here?
I grew up in Syosset,
okay.
And I'm talking about Syosset, Plainview, Woodbury community.
Okay.
I went to Syosset schools. I'm a byproduct of the Syosset school system since the fourth grade. Before that, I was living in Queens. And a lot of those schools were built on old farms, which had used various pesticides, which get into our bodies through playing out on the field or consuming the water on the grounds there. And continued exposure to it over time leads to cancer. Just recently, one of my teachers from high school, a math teacher, had passed away from cancer. And they just said that it was there was no known cause for it. But I mean, a lot of teachers I noticed at the high school were leaving with cancer and being treated for cancer. It can't be a coincidence after a while.
Sure. So how did that springboard you into politics?
Well, before I was a cancer patient, I was working at the United Nations as a policy analyst and a mediator, and I got then my first taste of politics and what it's like to operate on a world stage, what it's like to deal with different nations. Since I was working at the United Nations, over 190 countries come together and hash out the issues in particular. And a little bit later on, when I was getting paid to work at the United Nations, I was working in the Security Council and got to provide research to member nations that brought business to the council, and then also provide advice on various issues. So that was my first inkling that I wanted to be fully invested in politics.
That's some experience there.
But
that must have been very interesting for you to...
It was interesting. The link that our university had with the United Nations was a once-in-a-lifetime link. That
What university were you at?
I was a graduate of Fordham.
Okay.
And that whole program was not repeated anywhere else in the country. Normally, you had to be a grad student to work at the United Nations or intern at the United Nations. So it really was my foot in the door onto a longer, more successful career. But going forward from that experience, I had many obstacles in my path from graduating college to becoming an adult. I had a sick father at home, a sick mother at home, and I had to raise all of my siblings who were all younger than me. So I was going to college.
At what age was that?
I was going to college at the age of 18, and my father was already sick.
It's a lot to put on your shoulders.
This is going back 18 years now.
Age.
And all of my siblings were younger, so I was the guy at the PTA meetings. I was the guy at the CSE meetings because some of my siblings were classified special needs. Mm-hmm. I had to do all this very early on because of the fact that we live in a society right now where medical services are not the inalienable right of American citizens. We have to pay for it, and the cost has gone up to epic proportions to the point where it's putting people out on the streets.
Now you're getting into the issues. Tell me the top issues you see in our government today, and what do you intend to do to solve them?
Well, clearly the government is having a problem figuring out where they need to prioritize their resources, what should they be spending on, and how they should be spending it on it. And I see that a big suck, for lack of a better term, or a drain on all of the economies, whether it's federal, state, local governments, is the cost of healthcare in America. The fact that it is a deregulated system since the 1970s, and that cost has gone up exponentially. Healthcare has become almost 19% GDP of our economy right now, which is a mind-boggling statistic considering the fact that it's double most industrial nations. And because of the fact that healthcare costs so much, and because of the fact that Congress is unwilling to figure out a way to control those costs, which between you and me means adding some regulations to that system, it is a cost that ends up getting passed on to us in various ways. So the federal government right now sends a bill to New York State for Medicaid, which in New York State spends $63 billion a year for that.
Is that with a B?
B, $63 billion. And that part of the pie that New York State has to come up with is shared with all the counties. So Nassau County, for instance, is spending tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars on Medicaid. And it's part of the reason why it's bankrupt. Obviously not the full reason, but when...
I'm sorry, the Medicaid is bankrupt?
No, that the Nassau County is bankrupt.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's part of the reason that Nassau County is bankrupt because of the fact that they have to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars every year to fund a system that will just keep on going up and up and up. Okay. So we need to figure out a system that will control those costs. I'm looking to advance a single-payer system. My opponent, who is well-intentioned, says he agrees with it on an academic basis, but he's for a for-profit system, which doesn't have any of those regulations.
So I know that you're an advocate. You're a vocal advocate of a single-payer system, which to a point I am as well, quite a bit. Can you explain to me, though, exactly how a single-payer system can be implemented in the United States? Your opponent, as you mentioned, Tom Suozzi, has made very clear when I spoke with him just a few short weeks ago that getting the legislation through the system seems bleak at best, as our leaders are just not up for the task. What do you think? I mean, how will your presence in Congress change this issue? It's the issue is the idea, and I think Tom even agreed with this, that the ideal of a single-payer Medicare for all system is a really good idea. It's a beautiful idea, but how do we get that implemented in our government when so much of our economy, our government, our politics are already intertwined in the current system that we have, that we've just laid out and put out there?
You mean the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act, the ACA, yeah. I mean, how can we go from there, and Tom, and I'm speaking in Tom's words now, sort of, take away the Medicare that everybody has, take away the Medicaid that everybody has, take away the employers' plans that everybody has, that everybody likes, that everybody enjoys, take away everybody's plans that they have now after they just got comfortable with Obamacare over the past 7 or 8 years, and now say, oh, you're all going to go on the same insurance, it's going to be Medicare, you have no say about it, here you go. That's really a tough thing to get through Congress. I'm all for it. I want it to happen. I'm praying it will happen. But how can that happen?
Well, I mean, I agree with Tom that it's a great idea and that there needs to be a way to implement it that won't create shocks to the system. But if you look back over time at the way that the ACA was affected and the way it was pushed through Congress, Democrats had a supermajority at the time and had the ability to usher in that system by introducing a public option. It was something that was supposed to lower the price of health insurance throughout the country and make it more accessible and affordable than what was the ultimate compromise. I had the ability of challenging Nassau County Democratic Chair Jay Jacobs at a fiscal policy panel at SUNY Old Westbury. And we talked about the role of compromise in getting stuff done in Congress. And he stated that we as Democrats need to compromise in order to get anything passed in Washington. And I agree that you need to make some compromises,
Of course.
But you shouldn't be compromising your principles for the sake of saying you got something done. If it was a bad deal, or if
What about if it's just a step? It's not. Well, we got something done. We'll just settle for this for now. What about if it's just a step?
But you saw
in
how
that
Republicans
right direction?
acted. They amended that bill over 130 times.
The ACA you're talking about.
The ACA, yes.
Uh-huh.
And they
And ruined it. They really ruined it.
created the crisis that we were going to face when Obama left, which is the fact that the ACA is not so affordable. It became the Unaffordable Care Act.
It was. I mean, initially, as it was written, it could have been pretty affordable if they had played.
It could have been very affordable.
If our government played by the rules that it had outlined in the ACA, but it didn't.
What do you mean? If the
the risk pools, if the government played by the rules that it outlined, the risk pools, the hundreds of billions of dollars that it was supposed to pay insurance companies for higher risk patients, as well as cost sharing reduction payments that were going out to insurance companies.
But you also have to look at the fact that a lot of these insurance companies play a dance with medical service providers over how much they're willing to pay for the services, which creates a lot of the administrative cost that we see as people who consume health insurance. The fact that doctors have to bill 2 or 3 times higher than the services actually cost in order to get what it costs is something that creates a system that becomes more expensive and becomes more burdensome.
Do you think the ACA was at least a step in the right direction?
It could have been a step in the right direction if there was a public option, but absent that,
Obama initially had that in mind, right?
But I believe it was Ben Nelson who wanted an exception carved out, and then once he got his exception from Oklahoma, then others followed to the point where it just became a meaningless law. It did more harm than good to consumers right now. I mean, I just became an uncle recently, and my sister...
Congratulations.
Thank you. My sister was working at Target, which is a service industry employer, making $11 an hour, and expected to somehow pay her student loans and the cost of rearing a child to full term. And couldn't because of the fact that her pay is so menial, as kind of moving forward with your original question, we need to start looking at some of the other things that don't work, such as the fact that people are not getting paid a wage for the productivity that they provide to employers. Employers like Target, for example, rely on the generosity and kindness of working and middle-class families to pay for services like Medicare and Medicaid, to subsidize or justify the fact that these workers should get an $11 an hour wage. And
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Do you feel that Medicare for all is the right move, or do you think Obamacare with a public option added is it the right move?
No, I
we
believe
can't do both.
No, obviously not. I mean, if we were to go with Jay's plan, he would have liked to have
Jacobs, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
He would have, quote unquote, liked to have seen a public option. It never happened, but the system is now broken. So going forward, we need to have a single payer system, one that accounts for all of the administrative bloat that these plans have.
So how do you get something like that, a Medicare for all single payer system, Obamacare gone? How do you get that through?
Well,
how do you? I mean, that's the problem that Tom's complaining about.
I mean, Obamacare is not gone yet. But he needs the votes. He's correct only in that point that he needs the votes in Congress. However, he also has to vote on it, which is something that he's unwilling to do right now. So, yes, a bill was passed called H.R. 676, which would have promoted a Medicare for all system, a single-payer system.
Right.
And Tom Suozzi, for his part, joined Kathleen Rice at the beginning of his term as congressman and claimed that they both claimed to a crowd of people that they were for single-payer, but quickly reneged. Why is that they reneged? And looking at Tom Suozzi's financial statements and filings in his reelection bid, we see that he's unable to vote for it because of the fact that he gets so much money from biopharmaceutical companies, health insurers.
So you would vote for single payer if the vote was tomorrow and you were in a congressional seat, you would vote it regardless if it's implementable or not?
I mean, I had to pay for my own cancer treatment myself because at the time.
How would you implement it, though? That's my major question.
I mean, we still have ACA. The Republicans have not been able to eliminate it. You would have to start with that public option. And then just as public option comes in, then these thousands of insurers, or now we only have a handful of insurers because of the consolidation that occurred under the ACA, they're forced to compete with the federal government. And if they can't compete, then eventually the federal government will win out. But in a single-payer system, we also have to remember that we already pay for a lot of these things, for Medicare, for Medicaid. We pay for them in our payroll taxes. Why not take away all of these plans, which we spend tens of thousands of dollars for every year, and then say, for a little more in tax, a very small increase in your tax, you get everything covered without any of the gimmicks, without any of the out-of-pocket expenses, without any of the deductibles, copays, lifetime caps, or the end-of-life coverage.
It would be a beautiful thing if they can all go away. Let me ask you, Josh, you got 15 seconds to answer this. How do you feel best? How do you feel that you best set yourself apart from Tom Suozzi?
Well, Tom Suozzi right now is a guy who thinks he's going to be able to respond to the needs of the community, but whenever he's presented with a need, he doesn't respond accordingly. His answer to everything is that he'll form groups to advocate on their own behalf, when he, the congressman, is supposed to do that advocating in Congress. So whether you are a cancer patient or whether you are a Vietnam vet suffering from liver fluke, Congressman Suozzi is the one who should be speaking up for you, not waiting for you to do it for him.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Mayor Tim Tanky and congressional candidate Joshua Sauberman, for joining us on another edition of North Shore Now.
Thank you for having me.
I think we have learned today that if you are passionate about the issue and your vision and are ready to stand up to the machine, individuals can truly find themselves as a powerful voice of the people. Thank you so much for listening. Speaking of powerful voices of the people, I am Jason Samel. Please join me next week as we speak with the mayor of Seacliff, Ed Lieberman, to discuss the future of Seacliff, their neighbor Glen Cove, and so much more for another edition of North Shore Now on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org.